Welcome to Hope Springs Eternal. We're having positive conversations about the United Methodist Church. Today we're talking to Reverend Matt Miofsky, who is the lead and founding pastor of The Gathering in St. Louis, Missouri. Since Matt founded The Gathering in 2006, it has grown into a thriving multi-site congregation with 3 locations scattered throughout St. Louis. With over 1,600 in worship a weekend, The Gathering was recently named the 3rd fastest growing large United Methodist Church. Matt has written several books, including Happy, What It Is and How to Find It, Fail, What to Do When Things Go Wrong, and Flipping Church, how successful church planters are turning conventional wisdom upside down. Matt has been elected to serve as a delegate from Missouri to the United Methodist General and Jurisdictional Conferences in 2012, 2016, 2019, and is a delegate for both conferences again in 2024. We hope these conversations bless you as we continue to have positive conversations about the United Methodist Church. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have Reverend Matt Miofsky. He's a pastor over at The Gathering in St. Louis. And Matt, it's wonderful to have you with us today.
Thanks, Natalie. It's good to be with you.
So I'll go ahead and kind of get started. Can you tell me a little bit about your call story as well as how you became a part of the United Methodist Church?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in a small town in Missouri, grew up in a small kind of town and country United Methodist church. My mom was United Methodist. My dad was Roman Catholic. So I kind of went to both churches, had a foot in both traditions a little bit, but really kind of grew up in the Methodist church. I mean, that's where we had Sunday school and vacation Bible school, and that's where I was confirmed. So I had that kind of upbringing. And I, for me, ministry was sort of I would flirt with it, then I'd pull back and not think about it for a while. And I mean, the earliest sort of moment when I started thinking, well, maybe this is right for me is I'm sure like a lot of other people who grew up in the Methodist Church, we had like Youth Sunday every year where they turned over the service to the youth. And I remember I was like 14 years old. It was my freshman year of high school, and I missed youth group the day they were planning it. And so, of course, they planned the whole service, and nobody there wanted to take the sermon. Everybody raced to take all the other elements. And so because I wasn't there, they said, oh, we'll give Matt the sermon. And I remember when they informed me, like, oh, yeah, we gave you the sermon. I was going to pull out of it and say, no way, I'm not doing this. And my mom said, oh, you can't pull out of that. You have to do that. That's an honor to be asked to do that. And so I remember at age 14, I had to write a sermon. I had no idea how to do that or what it meant. I still remember it though. And I preached a sermon in this little church. And afterwards, I mean, I'll never forget, there was this woman named Gertrude, which is a perfect name for an older person at the United Methodist Church in the 80s. And she pulled me aside and she said, well, I'm so glad that you're going to be a preacher. And, me, I was sort of feigning, saying, well, I don't know about that. And she looked me clear in the eyes and she said, well, I do. And she just walked out. And for whatever reason, that kind of got into my head. I thought, well, maybe. And I remember talking to my United Methodist pastor at the time and looking at what you needed to do and heard more about what it entailed. And I thought, no, there's no way I want to do this. So honestly, I didn't think about it much. Once a year, they would invite me to preach. And then I went off to college. I played football in college. I studied abstract math, nothing to do with religion or anything like that. I went to Washington University in St. Louis. So it wasn't a Christian school. It's kind of the opposite. It's a very secular place. So, it was sort of off my radar screen. And then, during my time in college, some guys on the football team invited me to Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That kind of became my church. I got more involved in the Roman Catholic Church, believe it or not, simply because it was right there on campus. And really through leading Fellowship of Christian Athletes, by my junior year, they had asked me to lead it, which of course I didn't want to do. But I don't know how many of you listening have done this before, but I I finally, just to leave these people alone, because Christians can be annoyingly persistent sometimes. They kept asking me to lead it, asking me to lead it. I said, fine, next year, my junior year, I'll lead it. And so summer went by, I came back my junior year, and I thought to myself, what did I say yes to? Another thing that I still do to this day. Why did I say yes to that? But here I was leading this Bible study, and that really, for me, kind of shifted my perspective. I mean, up until that time, I had kept my faith really personal and private. Certainly at the school that I went to, people didn't go to church. They didn't talk about faith. In fact, I was even a little self-conscious about it because, it was sort of seen as silly or superstitious or something like that, not academic. And then all that changed my junior year. I had a friend on the football team who came up to me and said, "Hey, Matt, do you still lead that Bible study on Tuesday nights?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, can I talk to you about something? I don't have anybody to talk to." I said, "Sure." And he sat down and he opened up with me about something going on in his life. And, this was significant because, first, guys on the football team typically didn't sit around and share or go deep with stuff. And here this guy was like telling me something really personal. But secondly, I realized that this guy didn't go to church. He didn't care about faith. He didn't call himself a Christian. But what he was sharing with me was actually deeply spiritual. And I thought to myself, Jesus has so much to say about this. And yet here's this guy struggling with it all by himself and without any wisdom outside of himself. And so I did something that up until that point, I really had never done. I invited him to this Bible study. And he said, no, I'm not a church person. I don't want to do that. I said, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a church person. Just come. You're welcome to come as you are and just listen to what Jesus has to say. I think it could really help you with what you're dealing with. And he did. And that sounds like a really small story, but that shifted my perspective. Suddenly I looked around my university and I realized, like, while hardly any of these people go to church, claim faith, call themselves Christian, are interested in matters of church, if you could kind of pull back the curtain, almost everyone around me was struggling with deeply spiritual things. Think about the questions people are asking at that time. What do I want to do with my life? And what do I value? And what do I care about? And what difference do I want to make with things? And what kind of relationships do I want to have? All this stuff, they don't really teach you in a classroom. These are spiritual questions. And so I just started to do something I'd never done before. I just started to invite people. And I laugh looking back at it because I was the first leader of Fellowship of Christian Athletes that didn't care if you were a Christian or an athlete. I just invited people. And so we collected this really interesting campus ministry where, at a place like WashU, most of the campus ministries understood themselves as like, we're the place for Christians. Amidst this sort of sea of secularity, we're the bastion of Christianity. So if you're a Christian, we're your place. And if you're not a Christian, kind of stay away because this is our sort of protected place. And I didn't think that was the way of Jesus. We didn't see ourselves that way. Instead, we were like, come on, whoever's curious. Doesn't matter if you're a Christian, not a Christian, love church, hate church, have read the Bible, never read the Bible, live a really great life or have a real messy life. Like, you're invited to come just as you are. And we're just going to challenge each other to grow in light of who Jesus is. And so by the end of my senior year, this little group of 8 to 10, 12 people had grown to almost 80 students on Tuesday nights. And meanwhile, I had this whole crisis of what am I going to do when I graduate? And someone kind of said, like, well, what about this? Have you ever thought about this? And the truth was I had thought about it years earlier. And so, I had to tell my parents, which the first time I told them, they were a little bit confused that I was going to take this, real turn after college. And I decided to go straight to seminary and explore if there wasn't something to this idea. And so, yeah, I went to seminary really young. I was 21 when I went to Emory to seminary and got out and started serving churches in Missouri. And just 4 years after seminary, I started the Gathering when I was 27, 28 years old. And the rest of my ministry has been there thus far. So that's kind of how I got into this. It's a story I love to tell because I think there's several points of that I never had this grand plan. I never had a sense of where I was headed. I just always tried to take the next best step, and it sort of led me to where I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, why do you love the Methodist Church, and why are you choosing to stay?
Well, I'll tell you, there's several reasons I currently love, and probably throughout my uh, teenage years and early adulthood loved it. So, broadly speaking, I love the Methodist Church because it combines a lot of the features that I think are essential to the gospel. And while other denominations do some of these well, I love the way the Methodist Church pulls them both together. So, some things I love are, one, like this deep evangelical streak that's in our background. By evangelical, I don't mean political evangelicalism, in 21st century, what that term means now. I mean sort of a deep historic love for sharing Jesus with new people, this passionate desire to invite people into a relationship with Jesus. Because Jesus has changed my life. And I think that if we can't still be an evangelical church in the sense that we want to be an invitational church, a church that cares about welcoming new people into a relationship with Jesus, then that's not really I don't think, a church that reflects the gospel. But what I love about Methodism is historically we've had that streak. I mean, we care deeply about sharing good news. That's what led to circuit riders and the planting of churches. And, you look at a place like Missouri where there's 700 churches across the state of Missouri, one in almost every little town. And just this impulse to go out and to get out and to share and to form new things. And I just love that part of our tradition. And then along with that, we have this, deep belief in discipling people, in not just converting them or not just getting them to say a prayer or be baptized, but then to actually disciple them. And in things like small groups, to form their consciousness, so they don't just care about their own relationship with God, but they care about what's happening out in our world. I love the way that Methodists aren't afraid to pair kind of a deeply personal relationship with Jesus, but also this concern for what our world looks like, and does it reflect the kingdom of God, and engagement with social issues that I think so many churches are either afraid to talk about or unwilling to talk about. And the Methodist Church isn't that. So those are some of the things that I think captured my attention early on. I'll say too that, I'll hear sometimes people say like, well, I love how Methodism, you can kind of believe whatever you want. I never experienced Methodism as you don't get to believe whatever you want. I mean, we certainly have boundaries around belief, and what we believe is really important. And but what I do love about Methodism is it gave a lot of room for inquiry. Like I was a kid who had to ask a lot of questions. When I was at a place like Washington University, very academic place, I needed to be able to kind of interrogate my faith and make sure that I had a faith that could stand up to sort of inquiry and thoughtful probing. And so I loved how every Methodist church I was a part of, there was space for that. And that wasn't true of a lot of churches. A lot of churches see education as threatening, questions as threatening, even sometimes bouts of skepticism as threatening. And I never experienced that in Methodism. And so I know deconstruction is really popular right now, and for good reason for a lot of people who feel the need to deconstruct their faith. But as a Methodist, I always joke around like, I never felt a big need to deconstruct my faith because I felt like all along I had the chance to believe and then assess that belief and then modify what I believe and assess it and ask questions. And so those are some of the things that I love about Methodism. And it largely remains true today. And so the last part of your question, you asked me kind of, fast forwarding to today, why do I want to stay United Methodist? Well, I really want to stay United Methodist for those same reasons. I think the United Methodist Church is really well equipped to reach people in the 21st century. Now, it's a hard task, so it's not just going to happen naturally. It's going to be really difficult to do. But I think we have a culture more than ever before that's spiritually curious, but a bit skeptical about the institutional church. They hear so much about Christianity in the news, how it's tied up with politics. There's some real skepticism about whether or not the church is for them. And I think that church that I just described, one that's passionate about reaching people, so we're not just going to sit back and wait for people to walk in, but has this impulse to go out, which I believe United Methodism does, along with a real awareness of what's going on in the world and the willingness to engage that, along with space to ask questions and to probe and to be thoughtful. I think that's a great denomination to reach people in 2023 and beyond. And so for me, I'm excited that even as we wrestle internally with like, how do we want to structure ourselves and what's our discipline going to look like? And what do we need to get rid of so that we can be more agile and more capable of reaching people? Even as we kind of wrestle with that, I really think that who United Methodism is when we're at our best is who I want to be. And I think it works in the world, and the gathering has seen that. We're right in the middle of the city, very diverse, a lot of different kinds of people asking a lot of hard questions. And yet our church has been thriving and growing now for 17 years. And so for me, it's also not just a theory. Like I've seen the combination of some of those things that I talked about really effective in providing people either a new relationship with Jesus or a renewed relationship with Jesus after having thought maybe that they were giving up on it.
Wow, thank you. So as we're moving in this midst of this transition, and I don't, there's a lot of mixed, as you're saying, we are working to restructure ourselves essentially.
Yeah.
What are your hopes for the future of the United Methodist Church?
Well, certainly the present time we're in is hard. Not, just to say a word to people, I think that it's difficult because there's a lot of narratives out there about who United Methodists are and who we're going to be. And, of course, as someone who wants to stay United Methodist, I feel like a lot of those narratives are untrue or unfair. I hear things like, we don't believe in the Bible anymore. We don't believe in Jesus's divinity or that Jesus rose from the dead anymore. And I'll have people ask me these sorts of questions, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, I'm Methodist because we believe that Jesus was resurrected from the dead, because we believe that that Jesus is the Son of God, because we believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, and therefore we want to share this good news with other people. I mean, that's why I am United Methodist. So it's going to be hard for a time as we sort that out. There's going to be people who are leaving. But what I'm hopeful for is, while I never would wish calamity or catastrophe or times of trouble, I know that like in my life, when I look back on my life, it's through really these periods of real struggle, sometimes tribulation and suffering, sometimes things happening that I never want to go through again. But it's also during those times when God was able to do something new in me, because I was kind of broken open and I was more willing to change, to allow God to do something new. What I'm hopeful for is that this is going to be one of those seasons for United Methodism. As I hear conferences and people lamenting that, X number of churches are leaving, or our budget isn't what, is now going to be slashed, or we're going to have to rethink how we do staffing at the conference or general church level. We're really going to need to reorganize ourselves in a new way. We can't have the same number of bishops or DSs. I mean, as we talk about all this kind of internal stuff and we lament that, I also think it's the perfect opportunity. I mean, crisis breeds opportunity, right? And it's a perfect opportunity for us to really to reinvent ourselves in some ways that we've needed for a long time. I've been a delegate to General Conference. I don't know if you count the special session. I guess I'll be going to my fourth one. And we've known for 20, 30 years, hey, the way we organize ourselves doesn't work. The way we make decisions is too slow. The number of clauses and commands in the book of discipline not only contradict themselves, but are almost impossible to sort out and live out in every, letter. And so I think for a long time, we've realized that we have a bulky, slow institution that's not ideal for the church that we need to be. And so my hope is that because there's this big disruption in the Methodist Church, this will be a time when we can reorganize ourselves to be more able to reach new people, more able to start new churches, more able to think more creatively about what leadership can look like. Not everyone maybe has to go to seminary for 3 years and have a Master of Divinity. I mean, that's already not true, but rethink what leadership looks like. We can rethink how to use and share our money and resources. Maybe the old apportionment system is a bit outdated. We can have a new vision for what rural ministry looks like. I mean, in all these ways, I think we're in a time of kind of reinvention, and that's exciting to me. I tell people, if you're tired of a church that's unwilling to change or doesn't do anything new or isn't willing to think creatively, if that's frustrating you, I think the Methodist Church is actually a great place to be. United Methodism is in the midst of rethinking all those things. And I tell young people, there's never been a better time to be a young person or a young leader in the Methodist Church. And I'll say this, Natalie, I might get in trouble for it, but in some ways, like, we're desperate for good ideas. Hey, if you have a creative idea, there's more funding right now for it. There's more permission giving happening in conferences. People are willing to take a flyer and try things because with everything else being disrupted, why not try some new things? So unlike 20 years ago when I was starting and you had to go through, 8 committees and wait 3 years to try something new, I see places now saying, sure, let's go for it. And so for young people who want to try to do something creative, this is a great season to be a United Methodist. We want to try all sorts of new things to be more effective in reaching people. And so I would tell people, transitions are tough. Disruption is hard. Seeing the division happening is tragic. But in the midst of all that, we can choose to just see all that we're losing, or we can lament all that's not the same, or we can see the opportunity that it's affording us. And I would tell churches, if you can look for the opportunity, I actually think it's an exciting time to be a United Methodist. There's a lot of the questions that are being fomented right now are questions we've needed to ask and answer for a long time.
Thank you so much. My last question, you've really kind of summed it up a lot with encouragement and just talking about the hope for the future and everything. But if a clergy person or a lady person came to you right now, today, and said, Matt, I am really struggling. I'm having a hard time. I'm not dealing very well with this transition. What's one word you would say to encourage them today?
Well, I would, at the risk of repeating myself just a second, every time we're going through transition, and this can be a loss in your personal life, a job change that you weren't expecting, the end of a marriage that, you were so hopeful for, or the church that you love no longer looking the same way that it did. I mean, in every opportunity, we can see, in every transition like that, we can see that transition primarily as a threat and something to resist and fear. Or we can see that transition as an opportunity, something to lean into, trusting that there's something new that's possible in and on the other side of that. And I think we have a God, and whether it's the God who led Israel out of Egypt into the land of promise, the God who led Israel into exile and then back from that exile. You know, we have a God who uses crises, uses times of transition to do something new in us so that God can do something new with us. And right now, you may be in a season where you don't really see what the future looks like. It feels maybe like you're a little bit stuck. And I would just remind you, the Israelites felt the same way in the wilderness. The book of Exodus says that God could have taken them in a straight line to the promised land, but God didn't do that. It says that God took them the roundabout way. And I always like to joke around. If you hold your hand up, this is like roughly a map. And if this is Egypt, this is the promised land. God could have just taken them right over there. But it says, yeah, but they weren't ready for that yet. And God knew that if he did it that way, they wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't be able to do what they needed to do in the promised land. So it says God had to take them the roundabout way. And I joke around, the roundabout way is instead of doing this, they had to do this for a while. And all that time that they were circling, they thought it was dead ends and this is leading us nowhere. But all that while, I really do, God was doing something new in them, not just individually, but as a people. And so to folks who feel stuck, who feel discouraged, who feel like they're spinning their wheels in the wake of the pandemic, not making any progress, just invite you to remember that even right now, when it doesn't look like it, God is doing something new in you, in your people, in your church, preparing to be able to do something with you in the future. And so don't neglect that. Look for ways that God is stretching and growing you. Don't read too much social media or pay attention to what's happening in your conference or, lament every single thing that's happening at some general conference or in the church across the country, but instead sort of double down on what is God doing right in your community? What's God doing in your church? Who's the new person that just walked in your door last week, or the new person you met on the block this past month? And just really kind of pour yourself back into what God is doing in you, in your church, in your neighborhood. Because I think we can get so caught up on what's happening out there somewhere. We can get pretty discouraged if we spend too much time thinking globally about all that's happening to the Methodist Church, to Christianity. But I think that right in our midst, God is doing something new in us, even if it doesn't look like it. And God's preparing to do something new with us. And so I would commend people to look for that, pay attention to it, lift it up, celebrate it, dwell on that. Find ways to be grateful for what this season is offering you and your church. And usually for a lot of churches, post-pandemic, in the midst of this crisis, churches are able to make decisions they couldn't make before. They're able to try things they couldn't try before. They're willing to take risks that they weren't willing to take before. And so I would say lean into that, because right there's the beginnings of opportunity. And it may not happen quick. It's probably not going to happen fast. But God is, in God's wisdom, is doing something new with us right now.
Thank you so much, Matt. We appreciate you being part of this. And thank you for those who are watching. I hope this conversation blessed you as much as it blessed me. Thank you again, Matt.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Natalie.